it was just pure comedy. It was perfect. From where she was like, she's got this, diarrhea going on, and she's like, she thinks that she can smoke the weed to, kind of calm that down. And she's like, is it mellow? Is it mellow?
Yeah.
And then she smokes it, and then she's like, that shit was not mellow. Ladies and gentlemen, we do indeed have another one.
Another one. I'm going to get sued by Khaled for saying that.
Well, yeah, I suspect Khaled he'll go a little easy on you. He seems like a easygoing guy, right? He doesn't seem like he's too pressed for money.
Cash Money Records owed him like $10 million. Baby doesn't pay anybody. So apparently they owe $10 million. Khaled just said, you know what? I'm good. So yeah, he's not going to come after me for my little $20. We should. Hey, that's all I got.
So yeah, ladies and gentlemen, we have a press play for you. It is indeed on the movie Black Bear, which is basically just this very strange story, if I could say that. It basically, I don't even know how to describing this movie is a little bit of a struggle, right? Because there's just like so many different aspects to it. So basically it's about a woman who she goes to an Airbnb, and she's essentially, just there. She's a director, and she's there to work on her movie, yada, yada. But she's greeted by this couple who, obviously is hosting the Airbnb, and just wackiness and weirdness, ensues, and awkwardness ensues. But then that's only part one of it. Part two of the movie is kind of like a meta version of that story, where you basically see the behind the scenes of the making of not quite that story, but basically a similar story. So that's the best I can fucking summarize the movie to you guys. This is directed by Lawrence Michael Levine, as well as written by Levine as well. Yeah, we can just jump into first, before anything else, as usual, tell me just what you think of the actual movie itself. Did you find any part of this relatable?
First, I want to jump into what brought us to this film, right? Because we did a trailer review of this movie a couple weeks back, right? And I think I found this trailer in passing. As I was scrolling on Instagram. I'm familiar with Aubrey Plaza. She's a hit or miss for me usually. So, and I usually have strong feelings about her performance in films. So when I saw her in the trailer, I was like, okay, let me watch this really quickly just to see if I'm going to be interested in this, or is this going to be another project she's done that I'm just like, I'm going to put her on the list of Brie Larson. So I watched the trailer for this, and what I love the most was this entry scene right here, where she's in that red bathing suit, and it's just very eerie and weird and scenic in a way. And I love how the trailer gives you it's like layer one, right? When you're peeling the onion, it gives you a very different experience than the film, which is really surprising. I remember watching this movie when they cut to part two. I was like, holy shit, what's going on here? And then part three is just peeling back more layers of the onion. So I found this trailer online. I saw Aubrey Plaza in it, and I was like, you know what, let's give this a try. We reviewed the trailer, and then when we were thinking about press plays this week, I was like, you know what, let's go watch Black Bear. That seemed like a really interesting trailer that we reviewed on a past episode. Let's actually watch one of the films that we reviewed, and this was a great pick.
Yeah.
So your question was about the plot, right?
Or maybe more specifically, what, before we talk about anything else, in terms of how we feel about the whole structure of it, or whatever we think about the plot, was there a part of this movie that you found personally relatable? I know that there were several fucking moments that I was like, yeah, it's they just fucking airlifted this from my own life. So how about yourself?
Yes. So so there's an interesting scene in which Aubrey Plaza's character, Allison, first comes to the Airbnb to meet Blair and Gabe, right? And Blair and Gabe, they're together, but not really, right? Blair's pregnant. Gabe is, obviously the father, but they're not engaged. They're not married. They're just trying to figure out all right, how are we gonna start this new family, right? So obviously that's the situation I've been in. So it was interesting for me, like watching them go through that, like, we're together, we're not together. This is like kind of like a non-traditional thing. Like, we hate kind of like explaining this relationship. It was like very uncomfortable. So that resonated with me. Also, I'm a bit of a debater and arguer. So like that first night when wine,
No, you don't say. You're not you.
surprise. So when they're having that argument, Blair and Gabe are having the argument on the first night about like feminism in front of their guest Allison. Like, that was so cringeworthy to me because I'm like, if I was there, I wouldn't have been able to stop arguing either, even if we had guests. Just because like when I'm, when I have a perspective in mind, like I have to get it across. So like there were so many both moments in this film that resonated to me, as well as like character nuances.
Yeah. For me, it was there was just so many aspects to there's just, for one, so many layers to the movie, right? But like personally speaking, like I've been in situations when you're a bit on both sides of it, where you're somewhere and like two people, like a couple, like they're arguing and you're just like, this is getting weird. This is getting strange. But then also I've been a part of the couple who's just like, all right, we're just going to duke it out right here. Like, fuck it. Let the world watch. Like I remember one time me and my partner, we were walking on the street. We were going to go get pizza, and we were literally spending the entire fucking time loudly arguing on the sidewalk as we're walking down the fucking sidewalk, which, you're always amused at those because you're like, you fucking clown, why don't you guys just break up? Like when you see it on the other side, you're just like, you guys look stupid. But then when it happens to you, you're just like, I can't avoid this. This has to happen right here, right now. What I can relate to is like the digs, like how you were talking about how like how they were arguing about feminism and all that, but I found that relatable, clearly. But the other thing that I found relatable were like the digs, like when they were sitting and they were having dinner, and they were like recalling stuff about their relationship, and they were like, no, that didn't happen, or no, are you sure that's the way? And it's like these like little small fucking like darts that you like throw at each other, and I think that's just inevitable to happen like in a relationship, right? Like there's like, obviously,
especially like to your point when like she was like, oh, we didn't have jobs, and he was like, oh, we had jobs. Yeah. It was like, and she was like, oh, well, you're not a professional musician anymore. He was like, I'm still a professional. So she's years, and he's like, only a year and a half. And like a lot of those things happen in like relationships when there's like, the build up to an argument. It's always like very exciting to watch, especially when you're not in it.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Or it's hard to watch when you're not in it. I would say that sometimes there's like a line, right, where it goes from being like entertaining to being like, yo, this is uncomfortable, I need to leave.
If it's your parents and they file for divorce, like the next day, shit, that's just weird. But if it's like
care about 2 Christmases, I don't know.
If it's people you don't care about, you're secretly like, keep going.
So and then like along with that dig about like his profession, he was like, yeah, I'm still a musician, I still get paid for it. And she was like, his last royalty check was 53 cents, and it was just like, it's devastating, you can't come back from that.
That's when I would have flipped the table.
Come on, you can't have somebody call y'all like that. It's disrespectful, dude.
So that's why I always keep the 45 on me for moments like that.
Oh man, yeah. That's like so relatable, man. And I don't want to divulge too much of my relationship on here, but my partner, she's very fun. Like I hate getting into like back and forths with her like that because her memory is like fucking pristine for shit like that. So she'll just like, where I could say the same, like I could have things to say back, but I'm an idiot and I just can't remember shit. And so, but she has a fucking steel trap for her memory, and so she just always brings shit up that she's like, all right, you got me on that one.
I hate thinking back on like an argument or a debate about like things you should have said, like when you had the heat, but you just didn't drop it because you like forgot about it, and you got to like relive the argument in your head. Like, oh, I should have said this. That's the worst, man. If I had a time, unfortunately, it probably wouldn't be used to go back and change any like really important shit historically. It would be to go back and win small arguments.
Yeah.
Entity for good, but I just want to win that one small argument I lost back in the day.
Why do anything else? I mean, that would give you the most satisfaction, right? It's not fucking like, it's not Back to the Future where you go and you fucking play, all the stocks and all this other stuff. Nah, fuck, or betting or anything like. Nah, let's just win these very small arguments that nobody else cares about.
I would never have lost an argument.
Yeah, so we can kind of jump into like what we think about the whole plot, because this is a very fucking weird and strange movie, but I fucking love it. I'm going to say, I'll save this towards the end. I'll save it for the end. But to me, what this movie was a combination between some weird, quirky kind of like black comedy, as well as a Inception, as well as Birdman. It's like a combination of all those three things is essentially what this movie is. I say Inception because you're not sure what the fuck is real and not real in this movie. And there's different like layers to like the realness of it, right? So you have the first set of, let's call this the first dream sequence, if we're talking about this in Inception style, where you have Aubrey Plaza's character of Allison arriving at the at this Airbnb, and then even before that, we have her sitting by the lake, right? And the lake seems to be kind of like the thing that ties everything together, right? That everything basically takes place from that lake scene where she's just sitting staring out into the water, and so she arrives at the Airbnb, and that's like the first layer, right? Where she meets them and they all have this like weird sort of like, interaction, so to speak. And then the second layer is when she is after that part is essentially done. They get into an accident, and I guess we should say right off the bat, like, there's this like intense, like sort of brooding romance between her and Gabe. And obviously Gabe is with Blair and she's about to have his kid. And there's this like simmering romance between Allison and Gabe, that they have this sort of tension between them, that culminates in, of course, them, about the fuck is the classy way of saying it, I guess. And so they get into an accident after Blair seems like she's having a complication with her pregnancy. And then it cuts to part 2, which is basically the making of that story, except for the people, their names are the same, but their roles are kind of like reversed, where Allison is essentially in Blair's position and Blair is in Allison's position, and Gabe is played by basically somebody else altogether. But he's the director now of the film. And so this is like weird meta thing happening. So that's the second layer of Inception, right? The third layer of Inception is when she's sitting at the lake, because then like basically everything is, you're not sure if she's the person writing all of this, like if it's all just one big production, or if this is where she got the idea, like everything else already happened and she just got the idea for this story from this. Like it's very weird, complicated, but it's like Birdman because of that second part where they're shooting. It's about them shooting the movie. So there's all these like fucking like things that happen, and it's fucking hilarious. Some of the shit that happens like on the set, it was such a rich environment for just like tons of shit going on that is just like little shit that they add in that you just appreciate so much. So I definitely appreciated that part 2, maybe a lot more than part 1. Part 1 was just awkward in terms of just like the interactions between everybody, but part 2 is just fucking hilarious in terms of a lot of the humor that they brought into it. It's really emotional at times, but I think very, very humorous.
Yeah, you know what? And I think you laid it out perfectly. And if I were to add anything to it, it would just be like my perspective on this film, right? I kind of look at it in like 4 pieces, right? For the first piece of this film in part 1 was like it is a film. This is a movie about this young woman who's coming to this cabin to kind of escape what seems to be like her, crazy, tumultuous life, where she is like, a struggling actress who's becoming a director, and she goes here to write and to kind of like find herself, and her life is not quite perfect, and she's trying to like, she goes here to find some solace, right? And she happens to book this Airbnb with this couple who's like going through a struggle, right? And it feels very much like a real film in the beginning. Then part two, there are two pieces there for me. There is it's somewhat autobiographical, right? Because the character Gabe, he's like directing this movie, starring his wife, and it's kind of about their troubled relationship. Which is difficult because you can see like she's struggling with it because like she thinks there's like some infidelity in their relationship, and he's also like he's feeding into that infidelity, right? Which is the third piece to me. It's like the bridge between this being like a real thing, like a real story about their relationship, but he's also like intervening and manipulating it a little bit for the camera, right? To get the best out of her as an actress for the film.
What do you think about that? Like in terms of like his whole strategy for doing that? That shit was kind of twisted, dude.
It was super fucked up, right? Because you're manipulating with someone's like real feelings, right? You're toying with someone's real emotions, which when the camera's on, great, because you're going to be able to capture all of that emotion, that intensity, and that rawness, which they did at the end. But now you've got to deal with that thing in real life, right? So it's like, you may have destroyed your marriage, but you made a great film, right? Was it worth it? And then the fourth piece to it is like the comedic overlay, which I feel like goes over.
Let me super quick. Let me add one more thing to what you're talking about with that, kind of super fucked upness in terms of like being a director and trying to do things. So this is actually pretty similar to Stanley Kubrick and Shelley Duvall when they worked on The Shining, that he would just do a lot of fucked up shit to her in order to like get her in the mind frame for the role,
Mm-hmm.
And it is a kind of a classic technique. Like you have different directors that have different approaches for how to like deal with or not deal with, but get the most out of the performances of the actors. That is an approach to basically just be a shitty, or especially depending on what kind of emotional what kind of style the movie is, you'll try to sort of put your actor or actress in that mind frame, right? There's things about like when people are shooting and like if somebody's supposed to look tired during a scene, they'll just fucking keep them up all night, and just do shit to like make sure that they just never sleep, and not like including them on that plan, but just doing it, and so yeah, it's a really fucking interesting approach. Really fucked up, and clearly leads to a lot of real life, implications. But
where we saw that? Twilight. Remember with Kristen Stewart, and she was like in real life she was dating Robert Pattinson, but in the film she had to be like dating Edward, but also like flirting with Jacob, right? So the director of the film was like, hey, in real life, I know you're dating Robert Pattinson, but fuck me on the side, and then use that raw emotion and bring that into the film with Edward.
And it worked. Multi-billion-dollar franchise.
Like now we're all rich, and Robert Pattinson's like, you know what? Fuck this. I'm moving to Gotham City, and then we're gonna see what happens. I'm gonna get me a suit. We're gonna see what happens.
Yeah, I'm sorry, and I cut you off when you were about to you were about to go on to something else with.
No, I was gonna say, so the fourth piece of the film for me was like the comedic overlay that like was in both part 1 and part 2, right? So we see Aubrey Plaza's character in part 1 where it's like a very much a real film. There's like, even though like Blair and Gabe were having this very intense argument, Aubrey kind of maintains this like very real sense of humor about all of it, where she's like, yeah, man, bitches be crazy. And, she lightens the mood with her sense of humor, which is like what people do in real life when they're in these like tense situations. Right. And it was funny. It was like well comedic timing. I remember watching that and being like, oh, that would be so uncomfortable in that moment, and like how would I respond to it would probably be like to make those jokes, right? And then in part 2, where we get to see like a lot of behind the scenes making of the photo, there's like a lot of humorous things that happen there too. So I appreciated the spots of humor throughout this movie.
Yeah. This movie was really well done from that standpoint. I just love the entire cast and crew. Like there's just all these things. Like they had this thing where like somebody was always spilling coffee like
Yeah,
on somebody else. And there was and
the girl had
I might hold that. Say it one more time.
the I believe like the production manager or something like that. She had like diarrhea like the whole movie.
Yeah, I actually want to hold that because that's going to come up in my our when we talk about the characters and
Okay.
and shit. So yeah, they just had all this shit that in part two that I was just like, this is like fucking, this is so awesome. Like a lot of it was over the top, right? But it was you know, I feel like it was like a really good depiction of like what sometimes film sets are like, that just like a lot of fucking controlled chaos, or perhaps controlled chaos, as some of it might not be so controlled, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, I'm so appreciative of the structure of this movie. There's so many things you could say about the actual story itself, about how it's woven together, about what it means. Like, what the fuck does the bear mean? I don't fucking know what the bear means. I think there's some speculation that perhaps the bear was an indication of like where you are at in reality. That in part one, the bear is just a bear, is an actual like just a fucking bear, And then in part two, the bear indicates that part two was like a dream, because the way that Allison interacts with the bear in part two is like, that's probably not how you should fucking approach a bear. I feel like it would just maul the shit out of you and claw your fucking face off if you just walked up to it with tears in your eyes, it'll just take your face off, and so yeah, there's just so many different fucking layers to this movie. Very, very complicated. It's very simple yet complicated at the same time, and I think that that's an amazing feat to pull off, is to make something both complex as well as simple.
Yeah.
And so
and I think that was, as I said in the beginning, that's one of the things that drew me to this movie. Like when you watch the trailer on the surface, like the what you see in the trailer, you get that right in part one.
Yeah.
So you're not like left, it's not like you're going to watch the movie and it's going to be completely different. Like in part one, you get what you see in the trailer. In part two, you get like, it's kind of like watching a behind the scenes of the movie that you watched in part one. So you're getting like this extra, it's like when you order food on Grubhub and you get like a Philly cheesesteak and they accidentally bring you like something else like that's really good, maybe like a chicken cheesesteak, and you're like, I didn't order the chicken cheesesteak, but they're like, well, you got them both, and you're like, fuck it, now I got a Philly cheesesteak and a chicken cheesesteak, can't miss.
Yeah. So let's hop over to the characters. Obviously, do our usual runners up and MVP. The casting by credit on this is Julio, I believe that's how you pronounce it. Julio Carmesi, as well as Brian Scary, were the casting by credits on this film. Talk to me about who you think your runner up is and who you think your MVP is.
All right, this is going to be a little bit rough for me. I've been thinking about this for a little while, actually. So obviously you're going to look at like the top four, right? Top bill, but I don't know if that quite does it for me. I think one of my runner-ups who just made this film like interesting and made it feel a little bit lighter, especially in part two, would be Paola Lazaro, who plays Kaya. She's like the production manager, right? So in part two, you see a lot of her. She's the one who's like, keeping, she's herding all the sheep, right? Making sure everybody's in place to shoot like the next scene. She's like, she's the one who's calling the scenes and moving on to the next scene.
Well, she would actually be, in that case, she would actually be, if I'm to understand correctly, she would be like the first AD. The first assistant director. Yeah.
Perfect. Yep. You got it. Because I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about when it comes to like those titles. But yeah, so she's like the first assistant director, right? So she's like battling this like weird case of diarrhea, right? Throughout this whole production in part two. But she's also has to like wrangle, again, herd the sheep and whatnot. And she just kind of brings like a lightness to part two, right? At one point, doesn't she spill the coffee on one of the actors,
no,
Blair?
it's somebody else altogether that spills it, yeah. Coffee. She didn't have like much screen time, but like in part two, I think she really made it feel like, all right, this is like a real production, right? Obviously, I think Sarah Gordon, who plays Blair, I thought in part one,
she was like, her performance was so powerful, especially like the argument scenes. Like her emotion seemed like very real. You understood who she was, you understood her character, why she felt the way she felt. The From the argument scene after dinner to her having come in and like catching her husband Gabe sleeping with their house guest Allison, and her response to that. Uh, at no point in time during this film did I like question her character. It felt very real, even in part two. Like she felt like I'm an actress. I'm here to play this role. I'm here to take direction from the director, and she felt very much like a professional in part two. So I really liked her character and her performance, and you can feel the switch from part one to part two. Even in her makeup, the way they styled her hair, her outfits, like you can really feel the switch. But I mean, who and I got to throw out the Christopher Abbott too. He's my honorable mention. I know. I got a lot of runner ups here, but you could feel the switch in his character too, from the somewhat misogynistic, cheating boyfriend in part one to like the director in part two. The funniest thing to me is like, do you remember the doc scene when she was like basically questioning like why we have to shoot that scene again and why he wants to shoot that scene again? Yeah. And he was talking to her. He was like, we're running out of time here. Like, do you want to maybe like get your shit together? Like, and he's like shaking his head. I fucking hate when people talk to me like that. Like those self confirmationists, right? Who they're talking to and they're shaking their head as they're talking to you, as like you agreeing with them is like their expectation. Yeah. So I felt her anger in that scene, and I thought he was really good at that. Like he really switched. But Aubrey Plaza has to take MVP. I mean, powerful stuff, especially at the very end. The crying scene, and even in part one. I mean, I think she did a great role. Like, she was great being weird and being uncomfortable, and the intimacy between her and Gabe. Like they really sold that well. I got to check the box on this one for her as our MVP.
Yeah. I think I'm tired of you jocking my style when it comes to, I think I can kind of come up with somebody who, who I'm thinking is not off the beaten path in terms of, who might be the runner up or MVP. And there you go. Still in my thunder. But I'll say for my runner up, I got to go with Paola Lazaro, I believe her name is, and I might be pronouncing it wrong. My apologies. As Kaya, I believe her name is, but she plays, I guess, what would be the first assistant director here, for the film, and she just every fucking scene she was in, it was just pure comedy. It was perfect. From where she was like, she's got this, diarrhea going on, and she's like, she thinks that she can smoke the weed to kind of calm that down, and she's like, is it mellow,
yeah,
and then she smokes it, and then she's like, that shit was not mellow. Which was it was so fucking dope, and just and then like I think it's for people who are on set and are used to dealing with actors and actresses, her interaction with Aubrey Plaza when Aubrey was or I guess Aubrey Plaza was playing Allison when she was drunk, it's just like, yeah, like that. Of course, you're just trying, like, this person is a complete shit show, and you're just trying to salvage it because the fucking time's ticking, and you got to start rolling on that camera. Otherwise, you're all fucked because you just wasted all this fucking money. Every second that you're on set, you're wasting time and money, or time that is money. And so it was just like, yeah, like that's a fucking completely like sensible and logical scene to have, where she's just trying to like she knows she's drunk as shit, and she should probably just fucking go sleep it off, but she can't because they gotta fucking shoot this thing, and they'll all fucking regret it if they don't. So and she just played all that just beautifully, and so I thought she did a fucking supreme job with that. My MVP has to be Christopher Abbott as Gabe. I thought that his transformation from this kind of like meekish dude who had like a specific set of beliefs, but he, I think Blair, in the first part, she just made him seem so silly most of the time, with a lot of the things that she said, and he just seemed so meekish because of that. But then to have him flip and then be the director in part two, and have him be sort of like this aggressive mastermind behind it all, and trying to, get the best performance out of Allison, and then to turn out to just be a cheating asshole, as as was indicated in part one. His flip between both of those roles was fucking nothing short of amazing, and I think they all did a great job with that. They all had to like change things up. It was like musical chairs with their characters, in terms of their personalities. But I thought his was just like the starkest, as well as the most I think integral, I think to the movie, right? Because if he's not who he is and he doesn't pull his part off, I don't think any of the other roles really like work or stand out as much. I think the movie goes from being great to being just okay. If the relationships between them don't work, and I think that he was the linchpin in that. He was the common denominator in that scenario, that just elevated it all, I think, to the next level. Let's talk about the cinematography for the film. The cinematographer for the film was Robert Litzel, and the editing credit goes to Matthew Weiss. What did you think about the cinematography for the film?
I think the word that comes to mind for me is like, especially in part one, is very intimate, right? You have to, and it was about like capturing like the nuances in like the behavior of those characters, because it's a very weird situation. So, particularly on the walk from the car down the road to like the house, right? And the conversation between Gabe and Allison, like those like long shots. And I love like the continuous shooting that I saw in this movie where, you're just catching like a long continuous conversation. And in that conversation, there are like certain things that are said and there's certain things that are said in certain ways that you only capture in like that intimate style of shooting, right? Capturing the facial expressions, being able to capture like the tone of voice. And then they take that and they go into the house where they're having the dinner, which again, is a lot of long scenes, slow cuts. And then they take that and they go into like the argument in the house where you're getting, like they gave you so much visuals behind, like you're getting, like you feel like you're in the room. I feel like that's the way they shot it. It was intimate. It was kind of personal, but they did a great job of like really keeping the environment in play. So like where they're just these three people out in this cabin on the lake, and I thought that was done really well. And then in part two, not as dynamic, but I don't say that in a bad way, because you got to find a way to. In part two, the pacing felt a little bit faster in the way they shot it, right? You got to be able to catch like the pace of it all. This is obviously a movie production; things are moving very quickly, so it's a lot more faster cuts. And they did a really good job capturing there too. Like you felt like the change in energy. So I would say part one, the intimacy of it all. Part two, the pacing and speed of it all. I love that.
Yeah, I think for me, obviously like the editing was different in both of them, as well as like the actual cinematography work was different in terms of the camera work. And in part one, it's more stagnant shots, or at least maybe tripod shots, where you've got the camera on sticks, and you're either doing panning, tilting, whatever. In part two is more dynamic, right, where it's more of like a handheld shot where and it produces two wildly different feelings, and one feels like you're watching a movie and you're just going through all this with the characters, and you're seeing the story unfold. Another feels like you're behind the scenes documentary style shooting where things are happening, and you're right, the pace picks up, and it feels like all very almost like almost like it was a documentary that we were sort of watching. And then the editing's a little quicker, in terms of like the cuts, things like that. And so yeah, it was just very well done, I think, from that point of view. Let's talk about the soundtrack. I believe Julio Carmesi as well as Brian Scary were I'm sorry, I might have gotten that wrong, unless I didn't get that wrong. Did I get that wrong? I don't know. Anyways, I'll come back to the crediting for that. But yeah, what did you think about the score or the soundtrack for the film?
So I'm not going to try and fluff this part up too much. I think I would have to watch this film a second time to really get the music or the score. for this, just because like you're essentially watching, or you're watching two parts of a film, right? So the first part, I just thought the music was very, I think in both parts actually, I just thought the music was very complimentary. Yeah, it did what it did what it was
You tried.
supposed to do. Yeah, I fumbled there. I picked it back up though. The music did what it was supposed to do. It was like complement each moment, complement the scenes, add texture, add layer and flavor to it, but not like overpower any particular scene. I don't remember any scene in part one or two when the music was bigger than like the moment, or where they muted the maybe like the commentary in place of music or sound. I just felt like it was all very complimentary.
Yep. Yeah, I think the music for me, it was always like ominous in the movie, where it was like they had this like almost like it was like what you would find in like a psychological like thriller, or like maybe a kind of a horror movie, a vibe to it. It just always had this like eerie, and even with I think the music from that aspect complemented some of the cinematography work, like with her like on the dock, right? It just had this air like you're just thinking that a fucking serial killer was just going to pop out of nowhere at any moment and start slashing people up. It just had that vibe the whole time. And I think that was both in the way they shot it, but then also in that score. And I think it accented it. And I think that accent just, it just made it this entirely eerie thing. You could have had a completely different soundtrack to this. And I think they did have very different sounds in the first and second part, where I think they gave it a little bit of more of a lighter tone in part two. But it was still there nonetheless. It was still ever present, and I think that's one thing that they accomplished with the score for the film. What are our parting thoughts about the movie?
I think this is it's very different than any of the movies that I've watched like more recently in terms of like how they shot it, right? So again, it's kind of like one film with like two parts, right? I haven't seen that in a while. It was kind of like a nice treat, a nice like departure from the norm of film styles, right? You don't see this too often. So I thought that was really pleasant. I thought the acting here was phenomenal. We got some really good actors in this film. I thought the characters were great. I'd recommend this film to anyone who's like, I just want to watch a really good light film with some great storytelling, really good characters, and something different. If you're looking for something different, this is a perfect movie for you. The only shocking moment to me about this film, where I like it made me take a deep breath and pause, was in part one, after Blair, it looks like she's been injured from being pushed down on the couch, and they're going to the hospital when Aubrey or Allison's character crashes that Jeep. I was like, oh God, don't crash the Jeep. I was like a 93 cherry red Jeep Grand Cherokee classic. I was like, that was the most shocking moment for me. But I thought this film was great.
Yeah.
I'm glad I was excited for this movie when we looked at I was interested in this movie when we looked at the trailer, and this is a great watch. It didn't let me down at all.
100%. I will say that hands down, this is probably the best movie I've watched this year. We've got a lot of things this year, or I guess maybe I'll retract that. We've got some things this year, considering that, theaters and all are, closed down and all that shit. But yeah, I think by far this is the best movie I think I've seen this year, just because it's so weird and different, but also good. Yeah. It's not good enough just to be different and just quirky, but it's a rare combination to be both different and good, and I think that's what this movie is, and everybody did a fantastic job with that. Aubrey Plaza, Christopher Abbott, just all the characters, they knocked it out of the park in terms of putting on a performance that mirrored what the story was, that their performances elevated the movie just as much as like the weird quirkiness of the script would elevate the
absolutely
movie. This movie reminded me in a weird way of like Donnie Darko. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie. It's with Jake Gyllenhaal. It's one of his earlier roles.
Yeah, I remember not seen it.
Yeah, it's a very it's a weird movie, kind of like this, but also in that it has this like kind of like a circular kind of like meta thing where basically the beginning's the end, the end's the beginning kind of scenario. And and when Aubrey Plaza looks into the camera, it sort of like gave me that sort of like Donnie Darko feel where essentially, yeah, I'm not going to get too far into Donnie Darko, but it gave me that sort of feeling, and so. Yeah, you're left to kind of, it's open to interpretation, which I'm always happy when movies do that they're not trying to spoon feed you everything that the movie's trying to say or do or whatever. And then also too, on top of all that, I think this is a great introspection about just relationships and just how fucking tough and challenging they are, and you know why certain people do certain things, and I think it was just a great depiction of different, you know, aspects of a relationship. This clearly was written by somebody who's been through some hellish times in
100%.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
you know, I'll close this out by saying that like we press play on this film. We definitely recommend you do too. I think you enjoy this film. I really enjoyed this film as well. If you're looking for you know, something different, you know, you said that this is one of the best films that you've seen this year. I would definitely put it on my list of top 5 films for sure, and I'd probably be like high up on the list, on that list of 5. So again, we press play on this. We highly recommend you do too. And I love your mention there of Donnie Darko. Like if you're looking for a good like weekend lineup, what better lineup than to like watch a movie like this and stylistically, you know, find something similar, you know, to see if, hey, is this the style of filmmaking that I like? Is to maybe watch this film and then watch Donnie Darko afterwards and see what those like comparisons are between those two films. Like, I believe I've seen Donnie Darko on like Hulu or like Netflix or something like that. I might have to put that on my list of movies to watch this weekend. So
yeah, it's a weird fucking movie. I'm not gonna lie to you. Where I thought this movie was weird and good, I just thought Donnie Darko was weird. I don't know if I enjoyed it too much, but yeah. But it is always worth a watch, you know.
There's your weekend lineup if you're looking for something to watch this weekend and you're listening to this podcast.
There you go.